Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Today it's our pleasure and our honor, really, to have members of the Pennsylvania Fair Districts. And I wanted to read a little non-partisan introduction here. And it is a non-partisan group, non-politically associated, and here for all of our benefits. So hopefully everybody will go home in a good mood today. At least we'll have a better understanding of what it is that's going on. Sue Broughton is our speaker today, and she's a former president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Pittsburgh. And that's a very good beginning to have for her. She's a former member of the board of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. She graduated from Bryn Mawr College and earned a master's degree in physics from Brandeis. You need a physics major to get into this subject. She's taught physics at Dickinson and Point Park University. She raised a family, and then she wrote and edited technical manuals and marketing literature for computer software for 21 years before retiring. In 2012, Suzanne looked into the methods of redistricting in Pennsylvania to develop a presentation for a local organization. Little did she know what was involved in that venture. She's continued to research and speak on the subject. In December 2016, she joined the Fair Districts Pennsylvania speaking team, and she'll get into that a little bit about what all that involves. Fair District Pennsylvania was founded in December of 2016 by representatives from the League of Women Voters, Common Cause of Pennsylvania, Committee of 70, Pennsylvania Council of Churches, and others concerned about accountable government. That's a good start for an organization, I would say. Today, Fair District Pennsylvania is officially an arm of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase the understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Where else can you find a good organization with that kind of credentials. Fair Districts PA receives no funding from political action committees or political parties. The focus of Fair District is on amending the Pennsylvania Constitution to replace the current partisan redistricting process with an independent, impartial citizens redistricting commission before the release of the 2020 U.S. Census. So Suzanne, I'll let you get started. She has agreed to answer some questions at the end. The end will end 10, 15 minutes maybe after 11 o'clock. And I'll let you take
this way. I think okay, everybody can hear me? This is about the 33rd of these lectures that I've done. Every venue is different, and there have been only a couple that I've worn one of these things. So I think I'm used to it, but we'll see. Yeah, I am an aging techie, probably unusual that a woman studied physics in the late 50s, but I did because I had a very supportive father, and I don't think I'd try to do anything with that again today. But what remains from my scientific background is an interest in process, an interest in how we set up processes and how that influences how things come out. If you do an experiment that is poorly conceived, you're going to get poor results. If you, in the computer field, the old garbage in, garbage out applies. And when I came to this, I was interested in just how the way we are doing things is affecting what is happening. So, let's start here. May I have the first slide? Okay, now, these are results from 2012. And you can see that Democrats won about 51. They won a bare majority of the votes in Pennsylvania and all the statewide offices. But our congressional seats are distributed 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats. Now, people say, well, that's not fair, and I don't think it is fair, but I'm not sure fair is the way to look at it. I'm sure there's a number of people in my audience here who have worked with numbers, computer people, engineers, accountants, what have you. And anybody who's looked at those numbers against the statewide numbers would say it's not accurate. And from my perspective, it's not accurate. So I want to hit the next button. 2016 is a little bit different because people don't always vote the way they're registered. In Pennsylvania, they don't a lot. The registration in Pennsylvania is approximately 4 Democrats to 3.2 Republicans. But in 2016, the federal offices were won by the Republicans. That's support for Trump and Senator Toomey. But the statewide offices, which were the Attorney General and the Auditor General and the State Treasurer, were won by Democrats. So, and again, we still had our 13-5 distribution. It's now 12-6 because of the 18th district's change of hand with Connor Lamb. But it's still pretty one-sided. Next slide, please. Okay. As an aging scientist, I always begin with defining some terms. We'll define some terms. First term, reapportionment. Every year we do a census. We do a census on the year that ends with 0. And what happens is that we discover that population has shifted. And I think many of us know that population's been shifting from the northeast to the southwest and south for a long time. And in Pennsylvania, population has also been shifting in the opposite direction. It's been shifting from western Pennsylvania to the east and northeast, relative population. Western Pennsylvania has been losing population for decades. So there's 435 seats in the House. They get reapportioned, and you can see that in the latest census, Pennsylvania lost 1 seat. In the census before that, in 2000, Pennsylvania lost 2 seats. We have gone from 21 to 18, and we are expected to lose another seat in the next census. They're down to 17. Next slide. Redistricting. Well, if you lose a seat, obviously you have to draw the redraw the lines, because there's fewer districts. And we do, but there were all those gray states that didn't either lose or gain a seat. And sometimes they need to redistrict too, because population has shifted. And we always seem to need to redistrict our state legislature, which the number of seats does not change, but population shifts. Next slide, please. Gerrymandering. It's not new. In 1812, over 200 years ago, Governor Elbridge Gerry approved a district that looked like that. I don't know where the wings came from, but some cartoonist in the Boston newspapers decided that this thing looked like a salamander, added that, I guess, and coined the term gerrymander. Well, cartoon, normally that would last, as long as the paper on which the cartoon is printed? Not this time. This has been going on for 200 years. So, next slide. Why is it now a problem? It's a problem because technology has made it a problem. It's not that I don't like computers. I spent 21 years working in the computer field, and I know that computers can do some wonderful things, but they can also do some things that aren't so wonderful. So we now have very good mapping software, which I use to get places I'm being sent various places on these lectures, and I love my computer mapping software. It's great. And when it's combined with travel data. But when it's combined with data mining, of which there's not a lot now, we leave humongous trails on the internet. Maybe not us older people. We may not buy a whole lot of things on the internet. We don't use it quite the way the youth do. But we leave a trail. And with that data and the mapping software, very precise districts can be formed to do what the politicians want. So, next slide. All right, this is one of the most important slides in my show. I want to make the point immediately that this is a nonpartisan problem. I'm going to spend the next however many minutes, 35, whatever, 40, dumping on the Republicans, because they're the people who control the state legislature in Pennsylvania, so they're the ones doing the gerrymandering. But if I lived in Maryland or I lived in Illinois, I would be similarly criticizing the Democrats. This is the Maryland 3rd District. Isn't that lovely? Gorgeous. Nothing compact and contiguous about that. And this is Illinois' 4th District. So politicians, some politicians, I don't want to paint them all with this brush, but they're a bit like a little boy with his hand in the cookie jar. He's going to get as much as he can before Mama comes along and makes him stop. Maybe I'm Mama? Who knows? Next slide. So, let's look at the process. Now, this slide says redistricting process for Congress. It doesn't just say redistricting process. And that's because here in Pennsylvania, we have to be complicated. The redistricting process for the congressional districts and the redistricting process for the state legislature are two totally different animals. It is not done the same way. So, the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Constitution simply tells the states to figure out how to redistrict. Doesn't give any guidelines as to process or as to outcome. So the state legislature does it the easiest way. The party in power draws the maps the way they want them. They attach those maps to an ordinary bill, just like any other bill that would go through the legislature, and send it to the governor, and that's how it's done. Now, in a year like 2010, when both houses of the legislature and the governor's office were controlled by the same party, that's a slam dunk. That's not a problem. In 2020, that may be different, depending on whether Governor Wolf retains his office. I don't think that the makeup of the state legislature is going to change that much. It may change, but I'm not sure how much. So, and I should add that the redistricting, the census is done in the year ending in 0. The redistricting is done in the year ending in 1, the next year, 2021. And the first elections that redistricting affects is the next year ending in 2. So in this case, it will be 2022. Okay, let's look a bit at, thank you, what happens. I want you to just get those two shapes in your head before I show them to you in the context of the districts around them. Okay, next slide. Congressional District 12. This is what it looked like in the 1990s. A reasonable district, not scattered all over the place. And at that point, we had 19 districts. So this is 21, and that's 20. We lost 2 seats in the 2000 census. So what do you do? Well, they took one district out of eastern Pennsylvania. It was District 3, and they essentially renamed this area up here. It had changed in contour, but they renamed it 3, which is why the Erie area and Mercer and that area is now Congressional District 3. And then this is the next highest number, and that's where they played some games. This was represented by a guy named Frank Mascara. Does anybody remember that name? Yes? Okay, I've got people who remember this stuff. And this was represented by somebody who was much better known, John Murtha. So what do they want to do? Well, we pull District 12 over into where 20 was here. We create this thing. I don't know about the Wiggles, but basically this is where Mascara lives and this is where Murtha lives, so they set up a primary contest. Murtha won that, eliminating one Democrat. And then the next, and take a look at 4 here, just to note that that's there. In the general election, Murtha continued to hold his seat. But John Murtha did not live out his term. He died in February of 2010, I think, and if I may have the next slide. So now, the Republicans really don't need this area to set up another one of these contests. So they pull the 18th district down here, and now they make the 12th districts do this. completely changing it from where it was after they completely changed it from where it was before. And that sets up a primary contest between Mark Kritz, who has taken Murtha's seat after his death, and a guy named Jason Altmeyer, which some of you may also remember. Altmeyer lost that contest, and incidentally, Jason Altmeyer has written a very interesting book called Dead Center, which title derives from the fact that he is essentially a moderate who was in the dead center of left and right when he was in Congress, and Kritz, who is much more of a left-leaning Democrat, and Kritz won that contest, eliminating Altmeyer, but he couldn't really move to the center fast enough to defeat Rothfuss. So that is now Rothfuss's district. So that's one way that gerrymandering is done. It's just to it's a very blunt instrument, just to set up contests. Now there are some more subtle ways it's being done, and they're called packing and cracking. And packing is illustrated here. Whoops, not yet. This is the city. That's Mike Doyle's district, which can be counted upon to vote Democratic. The city does. However, what's this squiggle? Anybody have any idea geographically what that is? What? No, not Sewickley or Fox Chapel. I hear somebody say the Allegheny Valley. Yes, it's the Allegheny Valley. So what's in the Allegheny Valley? Well, there's 2 power plants. There has been some industry. Some of it is not as viable as it used to be, but there certainly was. So the point is, that's an area of union jobs, and union people tend to vote Democratic. So what they've done here is to take an area that would vote Democratic and pack it in here where it's not needed, because this is going to be Democratic anyhow. And so these people's votes are wasted. They're not useful because they won't make any change there. On the other hand, if they were in here, where this is going to go Republican, they might have made a difference. So packing is a way of putting more votes than are needed, many more, into a district in order to leave the areas they're taken out of with possibly slim majorities for the other party. Now I want the next slide. All right, let's go to Eastern Pennsylvania. This is Congressional District 7. And somebody managed to get maps back to the 50s. That's not easy to do. And so it sort of went along like this. I don't know what happened here, but here, and here it begins to spread out, and here it begins to get a little discontinuous. And then, after the 2010 census, it does this. Isn't that lovely? The Eastern Pennsylvania people have a nickname for that district, which you may have heard. It's called Goofy Kicking Donald Duck. We're all old enough to remember Donald Duck and Goofy cartoons. Next slide. But what I want to do here is to put Goofy and Donald in context. So here's Goofy kicking Donald Duck. And look at the county lines here. These districts wander all through county lines. They split up counties. It's a mess. But the district that I want to talk about briefly is not 7. I want to talk about 16. 16 is largely in Lancaster County. And I'm sure most of us have maybe been to Lancaster County at one point or another. So what's there? Farms. Some of the best farmland in the state. Right. And a number of these farms are Amish. So what else is there? Tourism. Right? So if you have a guy that's representing this area here in Congress, that person cares about the Farm Bill, cares about transportation, road systems, how to get products out from the farms, how to get tourists in. And those would be the main concerns, and probably cares about some other things. So anyhow, what's this squiggle up here? Anybody any idea what that is? Reading. Yeah, some people know their geography. Many audiences that I speak to have no idea. I'm speaking to people who have some experience. That's good. So what's Reading? Reading was an industrial town. It's a dying industrial town. It has, at this point, the most underfunded school district in the country. It has acquired a few outlet malls, but that's not enough, really. So do you think the guy or the person, likely to be a guy, that represents this area here cares much about Reading? No. So these people here have been cracked. They have been placed in a position where their votes are in with a humongous number of people that are unlike them, that have different interests. So their votes don't count either, for a different reason than the ones who are packed. They're unlike the people they've been put with. Next slide, please. Now, Pennsylvania, the state legislature. That's another kettle of fish. The Pennsylvania state constitution is not silent about redistricting. It's very noisy. First of all, it tells us how many Senate and huge number of representative districts there shall be. So that's set. There's no case of losing or gaining districts. It tells us that they should be compact and contiguous. And it says, unless absolutely necessary, no county, city, incorporated town, borough, township, or ward shall be divided in forming either of these districts. Now, absolutely necessary, those words are absolutely necessary, because if you have 203 districts, you obviously can't get all of Philadelphia or all of Pittsburgh or all of any reasonable sized city into one district, because that's too many people. So you have to split some of those, but you don't have to do a lot of what has been done. Let me, just a sec, looking for my water. And not to trip over that. Okay. Next slide. All right, let's again go back to the 1990s. This is House District, Pennsylvania House District 29. Looks compact, as contiguous as you can do given the borders of the municipalities. Doesn't split any of them. How do I drink water with this thing? Okay, I think. The population in the 2000 census had shifted east. As we know, it's been happening. And I can't argue too much with the fact that they chose this particular district to move east. They did. I might have chosen something different, but they chose that one, so fine. But what I argue with is this. This area here should be green. This map was only an Allegheny County map, so it doesn't show. So they took District 16, which is mostly up here in Beaver County, did this, split Franklin Park, and took it all the way down to the river. Then they pulled a little piece of 30 in here, and then they made these two wandering districts. I think they were trying to punish Ross Township for their support of a particular legislator. But don't quote me on that. I'm being filmed, aren't I? I cannot make a case that that is absolutely necessary. I just can't see why that would be. Next slide. 10 years later, they undid some of it. They put 16 back here. They took 30 out of there. But they still made these wandery districts, and I'm still not sure that's absolutely necessary. Next slide, please. This is the state senate. This is the district that Randy Volakovich currently holds. Anybody know him? Probably all of you. All right. And at first glance, this looks like a reasonable district until you look down here. And there are 2 wards of the city that have been pulled out of the city and put in there. And I don't think they had to do that. There's Sharpsburg could have been there instead of there. So could Reserve. I mean, I don't think the numbers forced them to do that. So why did they do it? Well, in one of these 2 wards, and I'm not sure which, is the residence of one former Senator Jim Furlow, whose district used to go up the Allegheny and around in here somewhere, so it was a viable district for a Democrat. But Furlow can't run against Volakovich. There's just too overwhelming registration edge. So he retired. And that's another case of setting up an impossible situation. Now, is that fair? Well, some people will say it is. I think that if one's party philosophy should stand on its own and issues should be discussed on their merits, and that this kind of thing shouldn't be necessary in order for one's issues to prevail. Next slide. This is Butler County. Here's the county line. How many districts or parts of districts are there in Butler County? Count them. 7. There's 2 that are wholly in Butler County and 5 more that are pieces. And I can't make a case for that being absolutely necessary either. So I think those are unconstitutional under the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so did, next slide, so did a young woman named Amanda Holt. Amanda Holt is a Republican. She was on the Republican committee in some municipality somewhere in the Northeast. I've forgotten which ones. And the word is that she was walking down the street one day and stopped to talk to one of her neighbors. And why they were talking about Pennsylvania districts, I haven't the slightest idea. But she discovered that she and her neighbor were in different districts. And she got curious and wondered why that was. And so she got hold of the maps. After all, she's a committee person, so she can. She got hold of the maps that were being proposed. And she looked at them and she said, no, they're unconstitutional. And she sat down at her computer with her graphic designer skills and she drew some new maps. She drew 3 different versions. And then she gathered people around her, and this is not cheap, to take something to the Supreme Court. But she did. And she took those to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court looked at them, and Justice Castile, who's also a Republican, but I think was on his way to retirement and was an upstanding individual. And he looked at those maps and he said, Amanda's right. And the court, even though it was Republican majority, threw the maps out. Well, fine. You've won your lawsuit. Now what? Well, the only thing the court can do is send the problem back to the people who created the problem in the first place, back to the 5-person commission. And they did. And so the 5-person commission, obviously, they could have used one of Amanda's maps. That would have been simple. Nothing's ever simple. So they drew a new set of maps, which include a lot of the gerrymanders I just showed you. And Amanda's group looked at the new set of maps and said, these aren't good enough. They're still unconstitutional. Well, justice moves slowly. And by the time it got back to the Supreme Court, the 2012 elections had already been held in the old districts, because the new ones are unconstitutional. It's the summer of 2013. The 2014 elections are looming on the horizon. So that time the Supreme Court just threw up their hands. They said, okay, these are good enough. And I don't think they really were good enough. So they got a partial victory. But a lawsuit simply can't solve the long-term problem. Next slide. Gerrymandering creates seats that are safe for an incumbent, limiting access to new candidates. But gerrymandered seats that are safe in November, they are really safe for a party, not necessarily an individual, because the individual can have a challenger in the primary. And the leadership can tell a legislator that doesn't vote the way they want that they'll find them a primary challenger, and that happens. So moderate voices and reasonable ideas, no matter which party did the gerrymandering, the moderate voices are just, and compromise just doesn't happen, because you've got safe seats for the party, and the voters have little choice. Next slide. There's been some studies from a business perspective. This is a study that Harvard Business School did by polling their alumni. I don't know, there might be some of those in here. I have no idea. But their alumni came back to say, these polarized legislatures can't get anything done. We don't get investment in education or infrastructure. We don't solve problems like health care. And their top recommendation was independent redistricting. Take it out of the politicians' hands. Next slide. Also, this group, which I know nothing about as a group, but part of the problem with these safe districts is that politicians are now really responsible to their donors more than their voters. And their donors are likely to be wealthy individuals, and they're also likely to be large corporations. Small business doesn't have the funds to influence politicians the way that the large corporations do. So small business gets the short end of the stick. And that's something that at least these people feel. Next. And finally, this is something that I have just seen last week. Franklin and Marshall, which does a lot of polling, did some polling and found that people who know about this, and there's lots of people in Pennsylvania who haven't heard any one of us speak, feel that these are bad. The Democrats certainly do, but a majority of Republicans and independents who know about this now believe that the map was drawn unfairly. I mean, Republicans are not monsters. They're human beings. They're people, and they see inaccuracy and unfairness. They recognize it when they see it. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip a couple of slides, Bob. Just if I have time later, I'll come back to this. Go on. Go on. Next one. Next one. Okay, here. The recent lawsuit. This is another problem. And I meant to change this slide, actually, for a different slide. So I'll talk it. Don't bother to read that. The recent lawsuit solved the redistricting, half of the redistricting problem, and solved it only temporarily. I have met many very intelligent people who say, oh, you won the lawsuit. The problem is solved. It's not. The lawsuit gave us a more fair map for Congress, did nothing for our gerrymandered state legislature. So it's only half the problem. And it only applies to the 2018 and 2020 elections. And after that, we go through this redistricting process all over again probably having lost a seat in Congress. So it's only solved it temporarily. That's the best we get out of a lawsuit. So we need to change the system. Next slide. I just put that up there so that this is the website of the group that's doing this. Let me call this to your attention. If you think I've done a good job, or you think you belong to another group that should really hear this lecture, you can set it up by clicking on that and filling in the information. We have lots of speakers. They have different approaches. I'm probably the only one that traces the history in the way that I do. If you want me, there's a place down at the bottom where you can say so, but you don't have to. Maybe you'd like to hear another one of our speakers. Next slide. So here's what we want to do. The system for doing this is fairly complicated, and somewhere over on the literature table there should be a yes. Let me hold. Why don't you just stand up and wave it around? There's a chart, and that chart is a comparison of the system that we have now and the system that we would like to set up. And on the back, it also tells you that we would bring the congressional redistricting into the same system. So we only had one system. Thanks, Bob. So a brief idea of what it should accomplish. First of all, we would like to keep the hands out of the cookie jar. We would like to have this redistricting done by people who are not politicians or related to politicians. And we would like to have people who will not seek office later in the districts they created. So, and there would be 4 groups, 4 registered Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 3 registered voters who are not either of those 2. They may be green, independent, libertarian, whatever. And when have any of those people ever had a voice in Pennsylvania politics? Not that I know of. So one is to keep the politicians out. Next slide. Next is to try to get rid of doing all this in secrecy, which is how it is done now. We want public input and we want transparency. So we want public hearings before they start. We want more public hearings after they start. And we want transparency. We want a public website, posts all information and how they're doing it. I mean, I remember from my high school days, which are now over 60 years ago, the math teacher who, if you did the problem on the test in your head and just wrote down the answer, what would happen? Show your work. Right. The teacher would say, show your work. We want them to show their work. And we think that would help a lot in getting what we want, in getting districts that were not gerrymandered. And finally, it would require not a vote of 6 to 5, but a vote of at least 7 majority to approve the maps, and it had to include at least 1 vote from each of those 3 groups that I outlined. Next slide. The 2 bills, I'm going to try this water thing again. Just a sec. There's a bill in the Senate and a bill in the House. They're identical. Senate Bill 22, which was introduced first, currently has 21 co-sponsors, which is not quite half the Senate. And it's in the State Government Committee, and the chair, Mike Fulmer, has held 1 hearing and has scheduled another one. So it's sort of moving slowly. Next slide. Then there's the House bill. This slide I had to update. Let's see, today is Friday. I had to update it on Wednesday. It would have been different if this would be last week. Because all this is the same. This bill has 110 co-sponsors, which is over half the House. It has more co-sponsors than any bill in the House at this point. But it's in the State Government Committee, which is chaired by Representative Metcalf. And for months, he has refused to hold a hearing on it or move it in any way, and he's essentially said it would never get out of his committee. Well, finally, Representative Samuelson decided to use a very rarely used House procedure and file what's called a discharge petition to release it from the committee. And Representative Metcalf's response was this. On Tuesday, this last Tuesday, at the end of the session, he announced a hearing for the following morning, Wednesday. That in itself is a violation of House rules because there's supposed to be 24 hours notice for something like that. And Wednesday morning, he walked in and he distributed copies of a revised bill, allowed no time for anybody to read it, took no testimony from anybody that wanted to do so, didn't allow for any discussion on his committee, and called for a vote. And the committee passed it. This is how sometimes the legislature works. The committee, his version, sets up a commission totally of politicians, a 6-person commission, one politician, one member of the commission from each of the 4 caucuses in the in the Senate and the House, which means that there would be 2 from the minority party and 2 members that are voted on by the entire legislature, which probably means that they will be majority party as well. And it does require 5 votes to approve the maps, which means that at least 1 minority party person would have to vote for it, for the maps. I have no idea how that would work out, but it puts it back in the hands of the politicians. So where this is going to go on Monday, and of course, did that Wednesday, they come home Thursday, they've been home Thursday and Friday. What's going to happen Monday morning? I have no idea. What Representative Samuelson will do, will he challenge the hearing because it violated House rules? Will he try to amend it back to where it was? Nobody knows. And I am not, as long as I've been doing this kind of thing, I really don't have a bead on legislative strategy. So, next slide. Why is it important to get this through right now? Because this is a constitutional amendment, and the Pennsylvania Constitution requires it be passed in 2 sessions of the legislature and then go to referendum. So it's got to pass in this session, which is, moving on. And we think it needs to pass by the end of June because the legislature tends to go on recess over the summer. And then there's another constitutional provision that says if this bill is something that's intended as a constitutional amendment, even though it's not going on the ballot this next time, there has to be legal advertising, which can take up some time in the fall. So we think we have a very tight deadline. Next slide. Okay, I'm not sure how to tell you what you can do to help now because nobody knows what's going to happen on Monday. These are the slides that I generally use. One thing I would urge you to do, go to the Fair District's website and click here. That will get you a page in which you can just put in your names and your contact information. And that'll get you an email roughly every 2 weeks. It's not going to clutter up your inbox. So you'll know what's going on. And you may get one more than every 2 weeks if this thing really blows into an interesting legislative fight. And then we have sign-in sheets, and we, the local group, I think Darlene's still here? Yeah, okay. Would like to know who you are, but that doesn't get you on the main group. And then, I don't know, if you go to candidates forums, ask them whether they support this. One of our members is trying to get together a group of Republicans to go talk to Mike Turzai and see if we can get him to support this. I'm not sure it'll happen. If there's anybody interested in doing that, please let me know. We're trying to get resolutions from local municipalities supporting this. Next slide, please. This is our resolutions map. It's interesting. There are some counties, Clinton, Beaver, where there have been some very active people who've been going around to various municipalities and getting resolutions. We don't have as much in Allegheny County. The county council has passed it. The city of Pittsburgh has passed it. Ross Township, Wilkinsburg, and the borough of Heidelberg have passed such resolutions. We would like to have more, but again, time is sort of running out. Next slide. And then, they're just things you could do. Put together a binder of information and leave it in your legislator's office. I would say make sure that legislators understand that because of the 5-member commission, that the next, if it were done by the current 5-member commission, the state, not the Congress, that since the Supreme Court is now dominated by Democrats, if the Supreme Court had to choose the 5th member of that 5-member commission, that would probably result in it being the state legislature being dominated by Democrats. But that's all up in the air now. So, I have no idea whether that helps. Write letters to the editor. At this point, I'm not sure what I'd say. And there is a petition asking elected officials to support that. Do we have those, Darlene?
Yes.
We do. Okay, so you can sign that petition on your way out over your second cup of coffee. Next slide. So, anybody remember this guy?
Yeah.
So, read that. That's Reagan in 1991.
Sue, can you read it out loud because people in the back can't?
I can. Sure. The problem is gerrymandering, the process of rigging the boundaries of congressional districts, the greatest single blot on the integrity of our nation's electoral system. Gerrymandered districts are grotesque, misshapen symbols of political chicanery. I believe states should set up bipartisan citizens commissions to draw district lines. Ronald Reagan in 1991. That should be the end of my show. Oh, coffee.
Any questions?
Now, I hope maybe there's lots of questions. Wait a minute.
Is there any recourse at all if we don't make this upcoming deadline?
No, it goes to 2030. No, that's not entirely true. There is no recourse to get the Constitution amended. The Fair Districts people have some strategies in the backs of their minds to try to alleviate the problem. And I am not I simply in the last few months haven't even tried to get that in my head. I've been too busy doing this.
Okay, maybe lawsuits.
Yeah, but as you said, you saw, lawsuits, and anyhow, how about the person way in the back, second from the back row?
I believe Mark Mustio introduced the bill of reducing our legislators.
Yes.
And I got a email from one of his gals that it had passed the House and was going to the Senate. And what we pay for our legislators compared to the other states in no receipts for expenditures, it's absolutely ridiculous.
It is.
And we need to move forward on that. Thank you.
3 days. Well, let me comment on that. Here's my understanding. I think I have it right. That bill has actually passed the legislature once and is going through the required second round. So if it's passed the House, which I didn't know, then it's well on its way. It reduces the size of the House from 203 to 150, which is still larger than many legislatures of much larger states. And of course, it would create the mother of all redistricting problems. My dream, actually, would be that both that bill and the bill on redistricting that I support both pass. Both of those say in the bill that they don't take effect until the 2021 redistricting, the reduction and this. And if that could all happen at once, I think that would be a huge improvement. But some of the problems with our state legislature is the gerrymandering. It's the safe districts. They don't care about what voters like you think about the expenses. They don't have to.
I came from another state where we kind of took it out of the politicians' hands via propositions.
Yeah.
And this state doesn't do that.
No. Are you from California?
Yes, I am.
Okay. This bill is based on the California bill. It's not exactly the same, but it's based on it. But California and several other Western states who have initiative and referendum in their state constitutions got this passed by placing it on the ballot themselves. Now, I'm going to caveat that. I am not totally a fan of initiative and referendum because I think, like technology, it's a mixed bag. I don't know how long you lived in California, but my first husband's father, who was very involved in California politics and California education, who's no longer with us, but he would tell you that initiative essentially destroyed a lot of California's higher education system through propositions that demanded a certain level of reduced costs. Now, I don't...
That was due to Proposition 13.
Right, exactly.
Property tax.
Exactly, but the point is...
Hot button here in this state.
Yeah, but the point is, it couldn't have happened without initiative. Right. Now, Pennsylvania Constitution does not allow for initiative. We don't have that. And there are many people who have said this kind of redistricting reform can never happen in Pennsylvania because we don't have that. The League, and in particular Carol Cunningham, who was the spark plug that started this, has just decided to ignore the "we can never do this" because many people have said we can never do this. The women can never get the vote. There's been a number in our history of we can't do this. And we've just decided we're going to try, that it's better to try and fail than not to have tried at all. So